A brief but important note about the language. Before we begin Huck Finn, I'd like to comment briefly on the use of language in the novel. In some high schools, this novel has been banned for its use of the N-word, a racial slur. I'd like to set some ground rules here. In our discussions and lecture, the only time it is appropriate to use this word is when quoting directly from the text. It's not acceptable in any other instances. This word, in the context of the novel, has a specific meaning. It refers to a person who can be bought and sold. It refers to a person whose opinion, based on deep cultural prejudices, does not need to be considered by those in positions of power or privilege. This novel is set in the 1840s, roughly 2 decades before the Civil War, though Mark Twain, the author, wrote it after the war. Specifically, Mark Twain is using this novel to examine how much a young boy raised in a deeply racist culture, with his father being the most vile racist in town, can change his attitudes about race and possibly slavery under unique conditions. That is, specifically, the question that Mark Twain engages in this novel is, how can a person in a privileged group, white people, change their attitudes about race in a racist culture? We will talk about these issues in depth at the end of our lecture series. But in this context, even the use of this word informs our understanding of the American South in the 1840s. As you read this novel, notice how easily this word is passed between characters, how deep the language roots are to the vernacular of Southern culture during this period of history, and how commonplace it is during this period of America's development for groups in power to accept the idea that some human beings are property. The word is used over 200 times in casual speech in this novel. This should be disturbing. The ideas encompassed by this word are utterly unacceptable now and should have been then. But in terms of understanding the necessity of civil rights and legal protections for all people, this novel shows the depth of inequality in the 1840s and, more importantly, quite to the surprise of its author, Mark Twain, also reveals how difficult it is to change cultural biases of individual characters or real people once racism becomes ingrained into a society's norms and belief system. To ignore the reality of deep cultural prejudice in the 1840s is also to ignore how racism, which is one of the evils present at the inception of our country, creates inequalities that extend deeply into our own time in history. In this, the novel not only showcases the movement of realism and defines racial prejudice in the mid-1800s, but also defines the difficult work we all have in moving toward equality in the 21st century. Please keep these ideas in mind as you read the book, consider its message, and remember that as our lecture series are topically arranged, we'll return to the message of cultural racism at the end of our lecture sequence focused on Huck Finn.